I'm back at school now. The first few weeks back are one of the toughest points of the year because you have to transition out of the I'm a regular human with hopes and dreams and interests and ambitions mindset that you've been in for the best part of 6 weeks, and accept that for essentially the next 10 or so months, every waking moment will be spent thinking about your curriculum or adaptation in the classroom or pastoral responsibilities. It's really tedious. Unfortunately, that is my whole brain and life now. But the last chunk of holiday is always particularly tough because for me, as soon as I hit the midway point of a break, it feels as if the start of term is like rumbling towards me, and it carries this like almost claustrophobic weight, so that by the time I hit the final week, there's just such inevitability to the academic calendar. It's really heavy going. And I thought I was doing better this year. I thought in the summer I was kind of holding myself together pretty well, having a nice time, switching off, like really kind of taking the time for me, until I found myself typing in our Discord, I've been playing a lot of Tetris recently. And then I realised, brain's trying to tell me something here, isn't it?
Oh dear.
Now, this particular Tetris bonanza kicked off with a specific hardware purchase that I made during the summer. Social media, for some reason, had started aggressively advertising to me what you might charitably call retro handhelds across all of my feeds. And these are the Chinese-made devices by teams like Miyu or Powkiddy, and they've all got weird names. They will run either Linux or Android. But these handhelds, they're packaged in a variety of form factors. They generally will come stuffed with legally dubious SD cards filled with emulators and ROMs. And with my Steam Deck being my emulation machine, I'd never really been tempted by the ability to play my retro collection using less good and less powerful hardware and tech, until I saw a particular device review called, I'm going to get this right, the Anbernic RG35XXSP. SP. And the SP is the key bit of that mouthful of a title, because this is a near one-to-one recreation of the Game Boy Advance SP. And that was the best GBA for me, Nintendo's lovely little clamshell. And after a rabbit hole week watching coverage of this device, I ordered one for the paltry price of £50.
Wow.
I waited 2 weeks for it to ship from the Far East, and then there it was in my house, in my head. Out of the box, it felt really great. It looked beautiful. I went for a classic Game Boy DMG colorway, like the original Game Boy. And it's got a sort of off grey with pinky purple button accents. Very, very tasteful. The hinge in it, which I was a bit worried about because I thought it might feel a bit cheaply made. It's really smooth. It's robust. The buttons themselves, something I was also worried about, given how Mad Catz or Competition Pro knockoff third-party pads used to feel. They're really good. They feel great. Just fantastic, really. To really get into the weeds for a moment, buttons on a pad or a handheld for any device, they can either be micro-switched, and that's like a classic computer keyboard. They can be rubber membrane switched, which is a slightly spongier quality, but most modern control pads use a rubber membrane. Or they can be dome switched, which is a very clicky on-off input. And the original SP was dome switched, and so the Anbernic SP is dome switched, and it feels excellent. Again, really, really great. Good resistance, really tactile, great for retro games. Software-wise, the out-of-the-box experience is an absolute disaster. It's horrible. The stock user interface it comes with doesn't make any sense. The ROM collection my card shipped with, like a no-name SD card. There's no rhyme or reasoning to its naming, its ordering. The emulators have mixed performance despite the spec sheet suggesting that certain consoles should just fly. But afternoon's tinkering, there is so much potential here. Like I found a replacement firmware called Nuli, that's KNULLI. I erased the entire ROM set that it shipped with and swapped it out for my own curated collection that was on my Steam Deck for the hardware that it would work with. I set up nice screen shaders and overlays to better replicate specific display quirks like the green ghosting of the original Game Boy or the particular bezels of the OG GBA. And I scraped artwork and metadata like I've done on the Steam Deck. And suddenly, this £50 device is now the de facto way I play the majority of 8 and 16-bit games. Because there's always been this sense of overkill playing something like Wario Land 2 blown up on a 60-inch 4K display.
Yeah.
Wasn't intended for that, was it? That's not how Nintendo expected you to be playing that game. So, you know, if you've got a machine that can play Red Dead Redemption 2 at full settings, but also Tetris at that size from the original Game Boy, it just doesn't work. But having this device that fits so nicely in my pocket, suddenly there's proper synergy between hardware and software, because the hardware just makes better sense for the game that it's playing. Nice bonuses for this device, because again, all these machines are quite variable in terms of what they ship with. The SP has a sleep mode when you close the clamshell.
That was going to be my first question.
Yeah, so it will just put it to sleep, pick it up. There you go. carry on. If
Perfect.
you're playing lighter games, like say Game Boy, Mega Drive, SNES, that sort of era, the battery will easily last between 6 and 8 hours. It supports Wi-Fi, so retro achievements are on the table. I've been having lots of fun playing through games that way. ROM management is really easy as well, because using this firmware, you just click a button and the device appears on your computer wirelessly, so you can just drag them in a folder and it's on there via network. It's just great. The machine's great. Newly, the software is great. Retro gaming is really cool. So the RG35XX SP from stock is so-so, but with a bit of love, it's astonishingly accomplished and great for someone like me, especially, who likes doing a bit of fiddling to get something going. It doesn't have an analog stick, it's just a D-pad. So kind of PlayStation 1 is probably the upper limit of its capabilities, both in terms of control and in terms of just what it can emulate hardware-wise. But that's still 15,000 games, you know?
Yeah.
I think I'll be okay. But Tetris then, I'm not going to go into detail about why Tetris is so good or why it remains my mental health toolkit game. But on the SP, I've been playing multiple entries in the Tetris franchise.
It's like organising your thoughts.
It is. It's what it does.
I know.
It's what it does. But yeah, I've been playing multiple Tetris entries to try and refine and adapt my classic Tetris skills. Because as much as I love Tetris Effect and to a lesser extent Tetris 99, they're very modern Tetris entries. They've got all the accessibility and quality of life tweaks that the series has absorbed over the years, like the hold piece, the ghost marker, the hard drop, consistent colouring, rotation, the bag system. That means you're never going to be stuck with a run of 6 of the same pieces and then a 50-piece drought while you're waiting to fill a gap. Like, all of that's been fixed in modern Tetris. And early Tetris entries had none of that. And I've always felt like if I was better at early Tetris, I'd be better at later Tetris. So I just needed the right kind of stars to align to give me the opportunity to get better at early Tetris. So my first SP achievement was beating all the retro achievements for the original Game Boy Tetris. The hardest challenges here were reaching 200,000 points in a single marathon game and hitting 200 lines in one game. And with no hold piece, very little wiggle room once a piece has made contact with the stack at all. Both tasks require extremely precise placement and considered rotation and movement. It took probably 10 or 15 hours of like concerted runs to do it, but it felt really good to finally fell that challenge. Because again, it's like I feel like I've beaten Game Boy Tetris. I've got kind of basically as far as it will go before it's unplayably fast. So that was like a real win. And then next up, a challenge that's still ongoing was to try and beat all the retro achievements for the SNES port of Tetris that came bundled with Dr. Mario. It was like a 2-in-1 pack. The goals here are quite similar to the Game Boy one. There's a few more versus achievements that require shutting out quite tough AI opponents, which I've done. But it's the final clear 210 lines in a single game that I was struggling with, so 10 better than Game Boy. I've reached 208 on 4 or 5 occasions, but the speed at that stage means that a single misdrop or a single tap on the D-pad in the wrong direction is just game over. It's really heartbreaking stuff when you put in like 15 minutes into a run prior, but similar to Slice and Dice, still having great fun. So every time I boot it up, I sit in bed before I go to sleep, I do a few runs, then it's like, maybe tomorrow, and then I turn it off, close the little clamshell, ready for the next day. Finally, a game that I covered back in my Hard Drop for Video series days, Disney's Magical Tetris Challenge is a Mickey Mouse themed Capcom developed versus Tetris entry for the N64, PlayStation 1 and arcade. I don't love how this one feels, and the quirky block shapes feel a bit like ordering Tetris from Wish or Temu, but it's been a nice challenge all the same, trying to beat the story mode with each character and getting used to, again, a very different feeling Tetris experience. Because as much as if you're not a Tetris fan, they all just look like Tetris, the more of them you play, the more hours you play, the more you realize there's different flavors. There's definitely different seasonings in the Tetris crisps. There's other games, of course, but that is where the majority of my playtime has gone. So long story short, retro emulation handhelds actually have a lot to offer if you find the right form factor for you and if you're willing to put in a bit of legwork to customize the experience. And on top of that, Tetris remains just the absolute goat when it comes to managing my own mental health, and I assume that will probably continue indefinitely. Because I've been playing it now for, I don't know, close to 30 years, with basically no pauses in that time. And I still have as much fun with Tetris now as I did when I first picked up my Game Boy version that my cousin gave me on cartridge when I visited my auntie when I was probably like 7 years old. So yeah, great times.